Hello everyone, sorry for the late start. I want to thank everyone for joining me. This is a live commentary on Blade Runner: The Final Cut. It is. I am viewing the final, like I said, the final cut, and I have set the timestamp to 000. So I'll give you a second to do the same. Like I said, I was having some technical difficulties with my mic, so I'm going to have to use my old one. I'm not sure why the blue snowball isn't working, so hopefully the audio sounds okay with me. So we'll figure this out. But yeah, this is my first time doing something like this, and I'm excited to do it and to talk a little bit about Blade Runner with everyone. Uh, if you're chatting along, feel free to say something, to ask me questions, talk about the film with each other, whatever. And if you have your film ready and set to 000, you can press play now. Now, to me, Blade Runner, if Dune is the essential read for a science fiction author, I consider Blade Runner to be an essential watch for a science fiction author. Because like Dune, it's very in its own way. It's not uh, they're not similar at all, other than the fact that they're both science fiction. But I think that the way that they're written and the way that Blade Runner is shown, acted, and directed, it's beautifully done. So I think it's an important watch as we go through the various credits here. There are, of course, several. This film is notorious for having multiple versions of it. There's the theatrical cut, which of course had the voiceover by Harrison Ford, who plays Richard Deckard in this film, and of course there's the international cut, which has only one part of the voiceover and has a little bit more guts and violence in it, but it's pretty much the same as the theatrical. Then there's the director's cut, which is the first cut to actually hint that Deckard might himself be a replicant. And of course, the version we're watching now is the final cut, which director Ridley Scott specifically slaved over to make sure that it was close to what his vision for the film originally was. Because when it was originally put into theater, it was sort of a dumbed down version of what Scott had intended, and it basically held the hand of the audience, and whether that was, and I think Blade Runner is both before and after its time. It's a timeless movie, and I think that's why we're sort of coming back to it now with another one. And I love the I'm gonna be saying this a lot throughout the movie. I love the cinematography. It's just breathtaking. It's amazing to me how real all of this looks, and it's no CGI, and it's all miniatures work, and just it's just dazzling. And as we saw a couple seconds ago, there was this shot of an eye, which could be there it is again, which could be determined as either somebody looking over the city or the eye of God. The eye is very important in this movie because a lot of people feel that when you look into the eyes, you see the soul of somebody, and throughout the film, the replicants have this red reflection in their eyes, which identifies to us, the audience, that they're replicants. But I think I think that it's shown just for that effect. I don't think it's visible to anybody in the film because nobody really reacts to it. It's merely just for us, the audience. And here again with the eye symbolism, the test to find out whether the person is a replicant or not is shown through this eye exam that the Blade Runners do to detect whether or not an individual is in fact a replicant, as we see with this man here. That obviously works for the Tyrell Corp. And these questions are sort of intended to get either some sort of reaction out of them. And of course, with it being an '80s movie, there's a lot of smoking. So I think, especially in a lot of Scott's films from that time period, Alien, and then James Cameron's Aliens, there's a lot of smoking, which kind of adds to the noir feel to it, because Blade Runner is very much a noir film, not only just science fiction. Then, of course, this replicant doesn't know really how to react to this question. And of course, obviously, they got the wrong response from this guy. And this film is a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know till recently that this film is based off of a book called Do Sheep Dream of Electric? I'm sorry, it's called I misspoke. Do Robots Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, and I have yet to read the book. I want to after watching the film. I very much enjoy the film, so I don't know how well the movie sticks to the book, but I know that I've heard that the author is very, very much likes the Blade Runner movie. And it's like this shot of this ship overhead is just breathtaking. I mean, it's kind of on the same level as not to compare, to only compare it to Star Wars as visuals, I think it was ahead of its time. This movie is set in an alternate version of 2019. Who knows if this is what the future will look like in about 2 years? But obviously, corporations and advertisement and pollution has been a big part of this thing. It's Blade Runner is also a cautionary tale about the human condition as well as our as well. This part always cracks me up, as well as our habits, how we treat the planet. This is the first appearance by Gaff, who is also a Blade Runner, played by Edward Olmos. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he's probably the most mysterious character in the film. I'm not sure exactly. I've after viewing this film a couple of times, there's been a couple of theories that I've heard that he might be the only human in the film, and that everybody else on screen is a replicant. I think that's a little far fetched, but he's a very mysterious character. It's like it's definitely in his eyes and that mustache goatee combo. Recently, it occurred to me that Harrison Ford's character Richard Deckard is retired from being a Blade Runner, and I thought a little bit about why that is. In fact, throughout the film, he gets beat up a lot. Like it's almost. And when I originally viewed this when I was 16, which was way before I should have watched it, because like I was too young to appreciate it, not so much like I couldn't handle the violence and content of the film. I think really it was just a matter of I didn't understand. He wasn't the typical action guy. So yeah, Harrison Ford had been in a lot of action movies, but the Richard Deckard character, he wasn't a badass. And I think at one point he was this replicant killing machine, but later down the road, he's as the replicants started to get more real and human, at least to him, Deckard kind of slowed down because there's this hesitation because he's not sure if the replicants are human or not. And I think that's a lot of people agree that that's the whole core of the film is what it means to be human. And I think that's why this movie is extremely important. Yeah, the police captain is saying how good he is. I think he's obviously lost a step because, like I said before, in my view, Deckard can't do the job as well as he used to because he's hesitant about killing replicants. And I think replicants are not only a representation of an alternate form of life, they're also a representation of how we abuse our machinery. It's like we tend to run our vehicles or our processing equipments down into the dirt. And I think the replicants show a good sort of flesh way of representing how that affects how that affects the machineries if they could talk and if they had feelings and whatnot. It's funny if you turn this turn the TV on right at this moment where Deckard's sort of talking with the police captain, you almost wouldn't know that this is science fiction. You would think this is set in the 1920s, especially with the blue background and the smoking and whatnot. Captain Wallace is played by M. Emmett, who plays a lot of really great bit parts in 80s movies. I believe he was in the first Missing in Action, and of course, most recently, what I watched him in was Red Scorpion with Dolph Lundgren. And he's always really entertaining. But I think in this movie he plays a much more restrained role. See, the replicants only live 4 years. Of course, this is a fail safe. I apologize for any background noise. Unfortunately, I live in an apartment and there's noisy neighbors. This shot of them driving is just unbelievable. The special effects are just. It's always really shocking how real this stuff is, how real it looks. Like I think the fact that it's also masked a little bit and smog helps it a little bit too. But even this shot right here, where everything's kind of out in the open, it's the miniature work. So I think a lot of Ridley Scott's films have that. It's like, yeah, there there's some CGI in some of his more recent ones, but like if you look at the behind the scenes stuff for Prometheus, it's surprising how much of that is actually one is actually is actually practical. It's really surprising. There's of course a contrast between the upper world of the of this city where the rich kind of live in a much more hospitable lifestyle. Like the air looks like it's a little bit cleaner, and of course they can actually kind of see the sun just a little bit. And this place, of course, looks like it's made out of gold, as opposed to the streets where it's overcrowded and dirty. And this is uh, this is Rachel, played by Sean Young, and who is a terrific actress. I don't think I've seen her in much else, but she's terrific for this role because with it being an homage to a noir style, the Rachel character almost seems like a individual out of the 1930s. She's just a classical kind of beautiful too. It's like Deckard is of course almost drawn to her immediately. interesting that there are these corporations in Ridley Scott's films. It's like you got the Wayland Corporation in Alien, and you've got Tyrell in Blade Runner. There's a hint of that red eye glare that I was talking about earlier, like right before she lit her cigarette. That we see that's kind of there just for the audience. Like, obviously, I don't think the characters see it. Otherwise, the need for this test wouldn't be necessary. They could just look at their red reflection in their eye. There it is, right there. It's much more obvious. I'm curious to see with Blade Runner 2049, not to get too much off track, what ends up happening to Rachel, since obviously she's a replicant, unless Deckard found a way to extend her life period. But if not, she would have died long before the events of Blade Runner 2049. Of course, fans that are familiar with the final cut know there's a big debate on whether Deckard himself is a replicant. So it's unknown. It's unknown whether or not 2049 will follow the events of the final cut or the theatrical. But obviously, since he's lived long enough for the events of 2049, he's most likely not a replicant unless he found a way to extend his life period. Maybe he found that after Rachel died. Who knows? But in my opinion, I don't think Deckard is a replicant. But the whole thing with like the unicorn stuff, it's tough to tell. It's This film is very very ambiguous. It's probably one of the most ambiguous films that you'll ever watch, and that's kind of the fun of it too. Is you get to make your own views on what the film means and what it means to you. Like you could just look at it as a detective story or just a thoughtful science fiction, but there's some people that view it much more deeply, and you could go either way. It doesn't matter. That's part of the Blade Runner experience. That's what these kind of movies are meant to do. Seems like it's always raining in this film. I think it's because of what's going on with the atmosphere, and plus it also creates a terrific mood. again, and this is yet another scene where if you turned it on TV and didn't know what movie it was, you would think that this was a 1950s detective story just based off this apartment and the way that they're dressed too. Going back to whether or not Deckard's a replicant, there's of course the whole thing with Gap with the origami, which represents some of Deckard's stuff. Like this is supposed to represent that he's attracted to Rachael, and Gaff somehow knows it. Personally, I think, although physically Gaff isn't capable of being a Blade Runner, I think mentally he's probably the most dangerous, and I think that's how good he is at reading people. It's like he can read so many people. It's like I'd love to see. I would have loved to have seen him read Replicant, but of course that would have taken too much away from the main story. But I imagine he could probably do it even without the little eye thing. He's just good at. He seems like he's good at messing with people. Of course, here's Roy Beatty, played by, I'm probably going to butcher this guy's name too, Rutger Hauer. Of course, is he really a bad guy? I don't think so. I mean, he's just sort of on a quest to have what everybody else wants, is which is more time and more life, and to meet his maker and to find out what exactly the purpose was for making him, and he's leading his siblings and followers on the same quest, and he's not doing it with some ill intent, but of course he's a combat replicant, so there's some animosity to him, but I don't think he's necessarily evil, although he does some questionable things in the film. I love this actor, Hannibal Chews, played by James Hong. He plays a lot of really great bit parts. Even now in films, like whenever I see him, he always brings a smile to my face because he's just one of those actors that's terrific. He's a terrific background slash supporting actor. He's really good, and he makes the eyes for the replicants. And then there's that eye imagery yet again. Like I said, Roy just kind of boils down to all these questions he has about his maker. Then again, here they are doing something questionable. In fact, I think these replicant characters start off not so human, but they get more human as the film progresses, just sort of like Deckard does. Tyrell is, of course, the man who created the corporation and that has created the replicants pretty much. Roy is quite scary, even though I think his intentions are pure for himself and for his friends. He's intimidating because again he's a combat model. So that's kind of how it's meant to be. But he sort of wants to be his own man, so to speak. I think Deckard's place, his apartment, so to speak, is a good representation of his inner psyche because a lot of people say your living area sort of reflects your inner thoughts and your inner mood. And of course, there's a lot of clutter around, and there's all sorts of stuff, and that's sort of what Deckard's mind is, especially now with Rachael coming about. His mind is all sorts of clutter. He doesn't know why he's helping her, but I think Deckard's lost some of his humanity as from his time as a Blade Runner, with how many replicants he's had to retire. Now he has to explain to this individual why she isn't human. Sean Gunn's performance here is particularly good, I think. You you fully believe that Rachel's come to the realization that she's not a real person anymore. Then of course Deckard's trying to cover his ass, so she'll pretty much leave him alone. I don't think it's necessarily that he maybe he does feel a little bad, but I don't. I think it's mostly he wants her gone because she complicates things for him. his kitchen is surprisingly clean. Most detectives have really dirty lifestyles. Like his apartment is quite cluttered, but his kitchen is clean. Cooking with Harrison Ford. Of course, with the Indiana Jones series and the Star Wars series, Harrison Ford was really becoming he really was a household name by the time this movie came out. And of course, unfortunately, I think this movie was advertised wrong, which is why I'm afraid for the new one. It was advertised as a action flick, and that's really not what it is. Like, yeah, there's some good action in there, but it's not the same type of action as Star Wars, or in the case of Blade Runner 2049, so it focuses so much on the action to draw people in. I think individuals who haven't seen the original are going to be kind of confused. Music in this film is absolutely breathtaking. I would recommend purchasing the soundtrack to this. I mean, if you're riding, relaxing, sleeping, whatever, it's absolutely incredible to listen to. It's got this ambient feeling to it. It's just awesome. Here is Chris, who is sort of a homeless replicant that's in league with Roy, and she's played by Daryl Hannah, who I believe was a dancer before she was an actress, and that's why she does a lot, is able to do so much of her own stunts and such in the film. If I recall correctly, Ridley Scott had discussed her audition and asked her if she could do any gymnastics, and she did like two back handsprings or something of that nature. And out of all the actresses, she was really the only one that had the physicality to pull off being not only a female replicant, but being able to beat up Harrison Ford. And that's not like a sexist thing. It's like, it's just, if she's little and not intimidating enough, you're not going to be able to believe that she could beat up a detective, which she does at some point in the film. I won't spoil it for those that are watching this with new eyes, I suppose. And by chance, she meets this guy named Sebastian, or perhaps it was her intention because she's working with Roy, and Sebastian works for Tyrell, and he's sort of a toy maker. And he ends up having the same kind of problems that the Replicants does. He's actually very young, but he looks double his age. He's got some sort of disease that makes him age faster. And that's on that level he can sort of relate to the Replicants, and I think that's why he helps them out and helps them find Tyrell later in the film. I don't know if it's mean or not, but I don't know if I would invite her in or not. great overhead shot. I know Ridley Scott obviously has a lot of great films: Alien, Gladiator, The Martian, most recently, and Legend is a cult classic. Countless more, but in my opinion, I think Blade Runner is hands down his best movie, and probably always will be, just because of the thought and the care that goes into the direction and the casting and the soundtrack. Just everything about this movie is breathtaking as an art piece. It really is art. The whole toy thing is kind of, I always thought was kind of strange, but interesting addition to the Blade Runner world. It's like this whole guy being a toy designer and working with Tyrell as a genetic designer as well. So it seems like before the film that the four replicants that came to Earth with Roy ended up getting separated somehow. So I'd be interested to see if there's a novel tie-in about their escapes. Like that would be an interesting read, because the replicants are very interesting characters within themselves. Does anybody know about anything like that? Leave a comment, let me know. Here's the first appearance of the unicorn dream, which Deckard has repeatedly, and is supposed to be a big hint as to him possibly being a replicant, which I don't, in my opinion, isn't true. I mean, a lot of people probably disagree with me, but it's just hard to say, especially with this new film coming out. That I think that kind of unfortunately ruins that. But we'll see how we'll have to see how that plays out. Decker's got a lot of alcohol sitting around. He may or may not have a problem. Of course, can't have a 80s science fiction without the retro television. I think although Deckard's skills in actually killing replicants has dwindled quite a bit, his actual detective skills are still pretty on point. Although there's still that slight hesitation, which is why he has to drink to sort of get himself into that headset. Aha! This is what we like to call the aha moment in show business. Ford has talked a little bit about this film. I think his experience wasn't terrific, although I think he was impressed with the production design. I mean, I can't speak for him, obviously, but just from what I see in interviews, it seems like this was a hard shoot because it was constantly a wet shoot, and I think with him being an experienced actor, Scott was so focused on directing all the extras and special effects shot, and that he felt that Ford should be able to kind of survive on his own without much direction. And I think that was a different experience for Harrison, but I think he did particularly well. This might be one of Harrison Ford's best performances. I don't know if it's my favorite. I think him as the president in Air Force One still might be my favorite role of his. It seems like the Blade Runner, the culture in the film Blade Runner is sort of a mix of American culture and Chinese and Japanese culture. It's kind of a mix of those three. It seems like, and of course, this had a huge impact on a lot of anime, especially Ghost in the Shell borrows heavily from Blade Runner, even within its theme and its sort of underlying context that's trying to explore. Of course, all these animals are probably artificial and are either extinct or the ones that are actually living probably don't live on Earth anymore. And so we find the snake guy. I know it's bad, but I always think of Indiana Jones when I see him around snakes in any film, because Indiana Jones really likes. I'm sorry, the exact opposite. He really hates snakes. So it kind of cracks me up to see Harrison Ford acting calm around snakes. I like how each character in the background seems to have their own story and their own personality. They're not just like background characters. They've all got interesting costumes and makeup and whatnot, and they all look like, even though they're going through their everyday lives, and I think they're all very interesting looking. There's never a dull moment for your eyes when watching Blade Runner. Everything is beautiful and nice to look at. Even the glasses aren't boring. There he goes again, going back to Rachael. This is Deckard's turning point for me, anyway. I think this is when he starts feeling even more empathetic towards replicants and other human beings. She just hangs up on him. There's of course that homage to weird Japanese and Chinese game shows. I apologize if you're from that culture. I mean no offense, but it's just like the whole thing with the game shows with the reptiles and whatnot. It's not my type of thing. But obviously with this replicant and uh, and her snake is obviously an homage to that. It's funny to watch Harrison Ford's Deckard try to play this geek. It's not it's not very convincing to me anyway, but I don't know. It's one of the few funny things in the film. A film that plays it so serious and so straight. She is very pretty. And here we go with the shower of the future. I want a shower like this. Seriously, are we gonna have showers like that by 2019? I don't want the overcrowding. I just want the showers. I don't know if I need that blow dryer or not, but it looks cool. I'm curious if there's a test to find out about animal replicants as well, since you can't really talk to them. She's on to him. Yep. This is really the first action scene that Deckard's had to go through, and like I was saying before, he's kind of lost a step physically, not because he's gotten old, but I'll reiterate, it's because he's questioning whether or not what he's doing is right. And of course, replicants have, I think they've got some superior physicality over humans, but it's not by much. But Deckard gets his butt kicked. Seriously, overcrowding is a problem with our. It's amazing how this film was predicted a good amount, not necessarily in style, but in substance. Like pollution and overcrowding is obviously a big problem that a lot of people are worried about, and that's why Blade Runner acts as a sort of a cautionary tale. It's like he's having trouble getting to this girl just because there's so many people around. Of course, I think he's also kind of drunk too from drinking at that bar. It'd be interesting to go through all these symbols that are in the background for the various signs and see what the hell some of them mean. There's Atari in the background, which is a popular video game company. It's like every second he comes close to shooting somebody else besides her. Ouch. Again with the costume design and it's like her obviously bleeding all over this jacket shows a lot. It's like even though we've only known this character for a couple of minutes, it's kind of heartbreaking because of how it's shot and how she falls through this fake snow. And here in a minute, when the police and coroners come to pick her up, there's a tear running down her face. And I think that's one of the things that gets to Deckard because he just killed this individual. And he's questioning on whether or not it's right. So you see, he's almost wanting to throw up. Again, it's yeah. There's that tear coming down her face right now. Here in a second, he's going to go back to the bar. He almost can't stomach what it is he just did. There's Gaff. That guy creeps me out. I don't know if I would consider him the true villain of the film, but I would consider him a bad guy. He just seems like he's not very nice. Now he's found out he's got to take out Rachael too. But does he have it in him? This, this other replicant. This other replicant's probably the most unstable out of all of them. And Deckard's drunk, and then obviously gets his ass kicked again. Reiterating all the pain that he's caused as a Blade Runner. I almost think here Deckard wants Leon to kill him because Deckard has done so many terrible things. Then there's Rachael saving him. That's a good shot, by the way. I don't think I could have made that shot. He's kind of trying to brush it off like it's nothing, but I think he knows it's definitely not just nothing. Seems like now she's finally come to the realization that she's a replicant. So how do you deal with something like that? I don't know. Find out that everything you know is a lie and not knowing who you are, really. Memories aren't yours. I can see why some of them go nuts. I think another reason Deckard's not a replicant is I think you'd have had an easier time going toe to toe with these two replicants that he just fought with. I think he's definitely human. He almost doesn't know what to say. Of course, that red eye line again. Now she's wanting to know how long she's got. From his reaction, it doesn't seem like it's long. It's a lie. I don't think he has ever taken the test himself. I mean, would you be scared to find out possible truth about yourself? So I'm assuming all these people on Deckard's piano are family members of his. And again, there's that 1930s feel with not only the music, but just having her at the piano and the way that she's dressed and the way that her hair looks. I think I said earlier that I first watched Blade Runner when I was 16, and of course I was too young to really appreciate it. But now, I think the I think the film is really moving. I think it moves me on a personal level, and that's why I watch it from time to time. Like I think this is my third or fourth viewing of the film this year, and I find new things about it. It's like even now, just watching it and making the commentary about it, I'm noticing more things. I think, especially now with me being more aware and trying to make decent contribution and being able to say something about it, I think that's another reason I'm sort of picking up on more things. It's one of those movies that you always pick up on something new. And I actually haven't, although I'm aware of what's different with the other cuts, I haven't watched all of them yet. Maybe I'll do a commentary on those too. We'll see how well this thing does and how much I enjoy doing it. But regardless, I might end up doing a video review of each of the individual cuts before the new movie comes out. Again, Deckard is becoming more human because he's starting to not only feel grief for what he's done, but he's starting to feel love for this character, and there's a sort of anger and frustration that comes with it too. I think Ford and Sean Young have pretty good chemistry. And he sort of needs this acknowledgement because it's not something he's ever really had. Obviously, not her either. I'd love to know who the actress is that plays the Asian woman in these ads because she's obviously become iconic. I want to refer again to Daryl Hannah's audition for Chris. If I remember right, her discussing the process that her and the other actresses that were auditioning for at the time had to make their own costumes as part of it. And I don't know if it made it into the final film or not, but maybe it was something similar. But she basically wore something like everybody else looked really beautiful, but she went for sort of a freak vibe to it, and I guess that was sort of what Ridley Scott wanted, or maybe he didn't realize he wanted it, but it sort of became part of the character. It's like, especially with that black line across her face that sort of surrounds her eyes, really, really makes the red pop. when I first when I kind of rewatched this as an adult, I was almost afraid Roy and Chris were going to kill him despite him being so nice. But I kind of admire the friendship the three of them have going on because there's an understanding. And I think he's almost jealous of Roy and Chris's relationship too. If he didn't know about Roy beforehand, I think he's a little bit in love with her. This is the first time we see Roy. This might be the only time we see Roy in not like all black. He's just wearing. He's still got black pants on, but he's got a gray shirt on. He's almost relaxed and not villainous. And he's both him and Pris sort of have this childlike curiosity. Sebastian season is perfect. But Roy and Pris don't see themselves as perfect because they only lived for 4 years. Yeah, that's all the actors. She's a very athletic lady. And here it is. Roy has this. It's kind of trying to intimidate poor Sebastian. I think is that eye symbolism again. Even though it's kind of played off as a joke, it's a recurring theme throughout the film. This is the turning point, one of the turning points for Roy, I think, when he comes to meet his maker, which is sort of his whole mission and his whole thing. And like I said, he's not villainous, he's not evil, he's not out to really hurt anybody, although obviously he ends up doing so. But I think I think he wants just what anybody else wants, which is just to have a life. And 4 years obviously isn't long enough to have much of a life. Because Tyrell is a high official and is very, very wealthy, he does not live in a very crowded environment. He's living in this place where he has all this room to himself, whereas most everybody else down below who are literally bumping into each other constantly. Of course, Tyrell's whole room looks like it's made out of gold as well. So even the chess pieces almost look like they're made out of gold too. There's a scene in Prometheus, not to get on like another movie, but I was just thinking about it. Kind of reminded me of this scene where the scientist, one of the scientists, kind of is talking to the android David, and he's saying that he wanted to meet the engineers because he wanted to know why he was made. And then David's like, "Well, why did you think your people made me?" And the scientist kind of says, "Well, because we could." And David's like, "Well, it's probably a good thing I don't have emotions because think of how that would make me feel to hear that as an answer." And I think that's part of what's going on with Tyrell too. He kind of made it because he made the replicants kind of because he could, and he didn't really think about the ramifications or the consequences of having them only have a 4 year lifespan. And now we find out that it's pretty much irreversible, according to the creator himself. You see, Roy is visibly sweating. He's already upset because I think even though the conversation hasn't completely finished, I think he's realized that his maker can't really help him. Here he's trying to tell him that the life he's had is good enough, and I don't think Roy really feels that way right now. I think he feels angry. And I think he kills him almost because he can't help it, because he's so disappointed and angry. And of course, he puts his fingers through his eyes as well, because again, eye symbolism. Eyes are the window to the soul. So he's angry that not only does he not get an extended life, but he might not also have a soul. And I think Roy genuinely does regret the things that he has done, because it's not necessarily within his control. It's just kind of what he's been designed and born to do. Like Deckard, it's part of who he is. There's a lot of languages spoken in this film. Uh, there's Chinese, I believe there's Mandarin earlier. Now these individuals here are speaking German. Of course, there's English as well. I love how mysterious and not entirely explained some of this world is. Like we have no idea who those people were just back there. But in a way, it doesn't really need explained because it's not part of the main story arc of this film. But the fact that there's this whole other world here that I think Blade Runner would make a terrific television series if there was a network that could pull off the practical special effects. Now we come to pretty much the final climax here, where Harrison, sorry, Deckard comes face to face with Chris, who almost looks like a a doll from with a company from her face her face paintings and the the attire she's wearing as well. It's like she almost blends in the background, like you're not looking close enough. It's like Deckard doesn't notice on her, but we as an audience obviously know what she looks like. But he almost doesn't notice her at first. I I can't say enough. I think this is Scott's best film. It's shot so well. Really, I think this I think Blade Runner is a credit to his talent. And I'd be curious to hear like what the reasons were behind him not directing 2049. Whether it was because he was already contracted to do Alien Covenant, or whether or not he was just happy to do producing and consulting. I don't know, but the director for 2049 is Dennis. I'm gonna butcher this guy's name too. Villeneuve, and he directed Arrival, which I haven't seen, of course, but I've heard very good things about all of his movies. And not only is he directed Blade Runner 2049, but he's also slated to direct the new Dune movie, which I hope that will be good as well. The old Dune movie has a lot to be desired. His toys are very creepy. I do not envy Deckard in this moment. It's like not only is he looking for a replicant, he's surrounded by all these creepy toys that could or could not try to kill him. And he's suspicious of Pris. She looks very lifelike, but he's not sure. And here comes one of my favorite parts where she kicks the shit out of him. And I believe it because I mean she's freaking nuts. Her death is pretty gruesome. Just like almost a childlike reluctance to die, or just the replicants are kind of childlike, aren't they? And there's Roy. Who obviously knows something is up. The confrontation between these two, it's more of a cat and mouse thing than a conversation. I mean, Deckard does fight back, but he's kind of helpless through most of it. And Roy is almost starting to look sick. His time is very, very near. And he don't. So he starts toying with him right away. I'm not sure, and it's almost funny that he's sort of toying on his fears too, because Deckard throughout this whole film has been wondering whether or not what he does is good because he considers himself to be a good man. Then of course now Roy is sort of calling him out on it, and I don't know really how Roy knows his name. Possibly could have looked through his police car before he came in. I guess doesn't really details aren't particularly important. The fact that he gives him his gun back too, just I think Roy's killing of Tyrell has kind of driven him a little bit off the edge, but at the same time, there's a sense of clarity that he's come across. Oh, here's my least favorite part. Knock on wood, I've never had broken fingers before, but it always looks like it hurts. I think both actors do really well in this final showdown, so to speak. I think Harrison Ford is visibly frightened, and for those that there have been those that have asked me a couple times about like the nail scene because like I didn't understand it either upon watching it, but the idea is that he puts this nail through his hand, which is not only a sort of homage to Christ, but also it sends these it sort of reboots his system because the pain is so great. That's sort of another thing. Replicants compared to like androids in like Star Trek or even Alien, they're much harder to tell apart because the androids obviously have white blood, and then the androids in Star Trek are have much different skin color, and it's like the replicants in Blade Runner are much more indistinguishable from humans. It almost seems like Roy's trying to teach Deckard something, like what it's like to be a replicant, to live in fear all the time, be constantly chased by other people that are afraid of you or want to take your life from you. And I think that's kind of a point that it's sort of a penance for all of the replicants uh, that Deckard's kill. Roy is just kind of trying to teach him something. I imagine at one point in his career, Deckard was like it was kind of like how Roy is in this scene where he's sort of maybe he did taunt other replicants. What do you guys think? I think there came a point where Deckard was probably a little sadistic, and that's kind of and at some point maybe he killed a replicant that was perhaps a child. Who knows? It's fun to speculate. And of course, it's the rain. It's constantly raining. I thought in The Crow it said it can't rain all the time, but apparently in Blade Runner it does. These rooftops are very reminiscent of a 1930s like police chase between the detective and the bad guy. Again, I think that's the purpose here. Here's yet another turning point for not only Deckard, but I think even more so for Roy when he starts to debate whether or not he should let Deckard fall. Because now, since Roy has done so many questionable things, just like Deckard, he sees that he's not so different from Deckard and the other humans, and I think he wants Deckard to realize that as well. And then here's this line, kind of explains what I was getting at earlier. I have seen this part with the voiceover. It kind of spells out what the meaning of Roy saving Deckard is. And Roy's last action in life, which I kind of want to stay quiet for. I kind of want everybody to listen to what he has to say. And I love this speech too, so I kind of want to listen to it as well. The actor who plays Roy, man, what a beautiful scene. Then there's the dove that I think really symbolizes his soul going to heaven. And really, that shot of the dove flying in the sky and the sun kind of coming through the clouds, it's really the only sign of the sun that we get throughout this entire movie. I mean, we see it kind of behind clouds, but we never get a decent view of it. But really, I've heard in interviews where Rutger Hauer said that he came up with the line like tears and rain, which is a brilliant line. I love that line. It's like the whole dialogue is terrific and it's heartbreaking. And Gaff just kind of has to get in one more jab before he leaves. When he says, "It's too bad she won't live," but then again, who does? I think that's another point this film is trying to make is these replicants live in fear of their mortality, and often people people in the real world do that too. They live in such fear of their mortality and whether or not they're going to leave a good mark that they forget to live their life. And that's kind of what the line meant to me, anyways, when he says, "It's too bad she won't live," but then again, who does? Because she's living in fear of her mortality and of because she's a replicant and as opposed to accepting who she is. So when you go throughout your day of life, try to live. I think that's one of the points this one of the many points this film is trying to make. And he's almost afraid that somebody's already come in to retire. Perhaps Gaff has already killed her, or maybe her time has passed. Oh, sorry, her time has passed. Excuse me. So you can tell he's terrified of losing her. Maybe it's because he did look at the file and he does know that she doesn't have very long. I am familiar with the ending to the theatrical cut where it's kind of a happy ending where they're kind of driving off in this into this forested area where it's all nice and everything, and it just doesn't work. In my opinion, it doesn't work. This ending is better because I mean I don't think there should be a stretch of the planet that's clean unless you're living in a rich person's quarters or whatever. And then there's the unicorn thing again. I think, in my opinion, I think Gaff is just so good at reading Deckard's character. Well, folks, that was Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, the final cut. It's one of my favorite science fiction movies. Again, I think if Dune is considered the essential read for a science fiction author, this is the essential watch for a science fiction author. And even if you're not an author, I think this is a terrific watch. It's one of those things you have to watch a lot of times. And I want to thank everybody for joining me and for listening. Please subscribe to my channel, check out my website. Go on Twitter. We'll be talking about Blade Runner for a little while. Probably end up doing more videos. Thank you for joining me.